So here are some selections from the Rebbe's Haggadah. Brief introduction to the Rebbe's Haggadah as follows. So I mentioned in the message about a little bit about the Rebbe's Haggadah. It was written at the behest of the previous Rebbe. The Previous Rebbe asked the Rebbe to write a commentary on the Haggadah. And this is in 1946 or 7, maybe 45, one of those years. And as I mentioned, it's perhaps the only work the Rebbe actually wrote on his own as a full book, complete specifically because the Hayom Yom, as I mentioned, which is also written at the behest of his father-in-law, and I think the Hayom Yom was actually written before the Haggadah, but the Hayom Yom is a collection. Every day, the Rebbe quotes a little thought from his father-in-law, whereas the Haggadah, as we'll see, it's also titled, like the title of the Haggadah, as the Rebbe calls it, is Haggadah Shal Pesach, the Haggadah of Pesach, Im Lekutei Taimim U'Minhagim, collection of reasons and customs. So officially, it's also a collection, but as we're going to learn, there's much more than just a collection here. And it's written, it's like a book the Rebbe wrote, as opposed to other stuff that are published by the Rebbe, which the Rebbe spoke elaborately at gatherings, and then they were transcribed, and the Rebbe edited some of it not edited, some yes edited, but a book written as a book, like as a sefer, written from beginning to end, to my knowledge, Haggadah is the only one. The Hayom Yom, as I mentioned, is a collection. The introduction to the Hayom Yom, the Rebbe goes to the history of Chabad, that is written by the Rebbe, but it's not a complete book. It's an introduction to a book. I believe that the Haggadah is the only full book written by the Rebbe from beginning to end. Just a little interesting thing about the history also is when the previous Rebbe started publishing books here in America, the Rebbe, first of all, before he became Rebbe, one of his jobs was to manage the publishing house. Now, what the previous Rebbe did was he chose cover pages for each of the Rebbes. So each Rebbe has a different cover page for their books. I'm just going to show you a sample because I have it next to me. So just to see you understand what I mean. The border here, this is the border you'll find in all of the Alter Rebbe's books. This is the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. We're going to quote it later. The Alter Rebbe's quote of Jewish law. So the Tanya has this cover. Look at the Torah. Anything that's written by the Alter Rebbe will have this, that's published. Anything that cost publishes of the Alter Rebbe's writings will have this cover. And the previous Rebbe chose this specific design for each of the Rebbes. Ostensibly, this matched their personality. And you'll see this little anecdote which kind of indicates this. I believe it was about the Haggadah. It could be it was about the Hayom Yom, but I think it was about the Haggadah. The previous Rebbe said, my father, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom the Rebbe Ashab, was a pnimi. A pnimi means pnimi means like a thoughtful, internal, introspective kind of person. This is what the previous Rebbe says about his own father. And you, my son-in-law, tells the previous Rebbe to the Rebbe, are also a pnimi. You're also this internal, thoughtful, introspective kind of person. And therefore, I'm going to give you the same border as my father-in-law, as my father. So the Rebbe Ashab and the Rebbe both share the same design border. And I believe that comment was made with regard to the Haggadah. And this is a design border that you'll find on the Rebbe Ashab as well as the Rebbe's writings, as well as the Rebbe's books. Now the Haggadah itself is a unique kind of Haggadah. I don't like using this word, but I think it's the best word I have to explain. It's in some ways an academic Haggadah. What I mean is, you have different kinds of Haggadahs, right? You have Haggadah, let's say, when I say Haggadah, I mean a commentary on the Haggadah. So you have a Haggadah, a commentary on the Haggadah that's, let's say, halachic in nature, right? So comments on the halachas of what you do and what you don't do and what's implied by the various different texts and their halachic ramification. Then you have, and this is probably the most common of them, is Haggadahs that are full of insights. Insight. Why is this word there? Or what's the gematria, the numerical value of this word? Or this word alludes to something else. All kinds of little insights that people like to share at their Seder tables. Now, the Rebbe is, because it's, as I said, I use the word academic, but I mean in the sense that the Rebbe goes through each word and gets down to, like, what's the Haggadah saying here? Why is it being done this way? Where does it come from? Why are these words chosen? So it's this very cut and dry analytics of the Haggadah. And because of that, first of all levels are introduced. As I mentioned in the comment, you'll see halachic, historical, Kabbalistic, Midrashic, and we're going to get samplings of all of that tonight, God willing. And likewise, the insights that emerge aren't because the Rebbe is looking for an insight, as it were. It's more that the Rebbe is analyzing the text almost like academically, and then the insights emerge as a result in analyzing the text in its very simple depth, best way of putting it. So this is the kind of background to the Haggadah. So it's a very unique commentary on the Haggadah. It's not a very common type of commentary, and it covers vast swaths of Jewish thought, history, halacha, Kabbalistic, and all in this very analytical, specific, particular, cutting type of way. Another comment to say is that this is something that I think the Rebbe was similar to the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, and that they both spoke very prolifically. The Rebbe would speak on one topic for 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer, and the Rebbe would elaborate. When the Rebbe would ask a question, the Rebbe would go on and on to make the question stronger and come from this angle, come from that angle, and then when the Rebbe would give the answer, the Rebbe would also elaborate. The Rebbe's speaking was very prolific, but the Rebbe's writing, as well as the Alter Rebbe's writing, was very concise, very, very concise. The previous Rebbe's writings, and even his father's writings, and the previous Rebbe's, their writing itself is very prolific. The writing itself can go on in poetic language and artistic language, and to describe scenarios and scenes, and describe questions, and describe answers, and describe ideas. And the Rebbe would say something that the previous Rebbe's would take 3 pages to write, the Rebbe would do it in a paragraph. So anybody here learning, who learns Rebbe Maamorim, know what I'm talking about when I say this. That you learn a shir, and you learn one line, and the guy giving the shir could spend the next half an hour explaining it. Rebbe's writing is very concise and precise. And the same thing is true of the Haggadah to the nth degree. Every word is very precisely chosen. And we're going to see at least one sample tonight where we're going to get that, where every word is really specifically chosen. And because of this is why there's so much super commentary. There's been, pages, books written commenting on the Rebbe's commentary. Okay, so with that, let's get into it. The first thing to say is, actually this is another introductory remark, is that the Rebbe's comments on the Haggadah are on the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, right? The Alter Rebbe wrote a Siddur, right? Writing a Siddur doesn't mean that you wrote a Siddur. The Siddur is written by 2,000 years ago by the Anshe Knesset Agdola, by the men of the Great Assembly. But writing a Siddur means that the Alter Rebbe collected many different Siddurim that were available at the time, and put together what he thought was the proper way of doing the prayer. Choosing a word here, a paragraph here, and whatnot. In addition to that, often writing a siddur, not just for the Alter Rebbe, but for many, means that you'll write brief paragraphs of halacha, Jewish law and custom that you'll put into the siddur. Now, a proper siddur doesn't just have the daily schedule, but actually has all the liturgy, which would include a machzer, which would include a Haggadah as well. So in the Alter Rebbe's siddur, there's a Haggadah, right? And at the Haggadah, the Alter Rebbe has little passages of halachic commentary of what you should and shouldn't do at the Seder. And that's the first text we're reading. So first of all, as you can read here, the first section we're going to see from the Rebbe's Haggadah is the Rebbe's comments on the custom to place pieces of bread around the house before we search for the Chametz. So first, we're going to look at the paragraph in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, which tells us this custom to put these pieces of bread around the house. The translation here comes from the Siddur that we use in MTC, but it's not an exact translation because they've incorporated other things. But the basic idea is there. So let's look at the Hebrew here. Haminag, a custom is la'niach titei chametz kasha, to place pieces of hard chametz. Zman ma, sometime, kaidim habedika, before one searches. Kedei sheyimtzim haboidek, so that the one who is doing the searching shall find it. So this is the custom, to put pieces of bread around the house, specifically hard pieces of bread, because you don't want them to make crumbs and make it more difficult to find. Practical advice, use pita. Pita does not leave crumbs. So the custom is to put pieces of bread around the house in order that they should be found. Now, Valpia Kabbalah, for Kabbalistic reasons, Yesh laniach, the custom is to place asara petitin, 10 pieces of bread. Okay. And then it says, Kodim sheyasel livdek yivarech, before he begins the search, he makes the blessing, baruch hatatz, and so on. So now let's go to the Rebbe's comment. So here I write here, Lakutei Taimim, meaning to say the Rebbe's Haggadah, which is called the collection of reasons. So the Rebbe first quotes the Alter Rebbe's comment from the Siddur, which says, it's a custom to place pieces of bread around the house before searching. So the first comment the Rebbe makes is the fact that the Alter Rebbe calls it a minhag and not a law. It doesn't say Jewish law is that you should put pieces of bread around the house. He says it's a custom. Why is it only custom and not law? So explains the Rebbe. Meikar adin, because by the strict letter of the law, ain't sort of klal haniach. You don't have to put anything around the house, following the strict letter of the law. Ki ha-mitzvah, because the commandment, it's a rabbinic commandment, mind you, but the commandment is lachapes acher ha-chametz. It's to search for chametz. The gam in loy matzah, and even if you don't find any bread, you fulfill the mitzvah in its optimal manner. Because the mitzvah is to search the house to make sure you have none. The mitzvah is not to find the chametz. The mitzvah is to search for chametz. And even if you don't find anything, you did the mitzvah because you searched your house to make sure there's no chametz. Which, by the way, I'm just putting this out there, this custom to put pieces of bread around the house has become so prevalent that people often confuse the mitzvah with the custom. And they think the mitzvah is to walk around the house and collect the 10 pieces. That's not. The mitzvah is to search your home for chametz. Now, our custom is to put 5 pieces of bread out to find them. That's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not to collect 10 pieces of bread lying around your house. The mitzvah is to search your home to make sure there's no chametz. And the custom is to put these pieces around.
Yeah, but you're already.
Sorry, go ahead.
But you already cleaned the house. Yeah. Everything is searched already.
Yeah.
So you're searching for nothing because you already cleaned it.
You're doing the last search. In theory, you're right. In theory, you begin your search for chametz way earlier, right? But the practical mitzvah of when you're searching is the night before. But you're right, because for example, you could do your search, the bedika, earlier. Like someone's traveling, they have to do the bedika earlier. They could do it earlier than just the night before. But technically, You're right. Yeah.
Because the purpose of the 10 pieces is technically that I'm searching because I'm finding something.
No, we're going to learn what the 10 pieces are for. Right?
Okay.
So right now, this is exactly where we're going. We're going exactly in that direction. So good you asked that question. Okay, so the first thing is to make this point that it's a minhag, not a halacha. Because the halacha is, the mitzvah is to search, not to find. Okay, so it's just the custom to put it out there. The Rebbe puts in the parentheses here 2 sources for this idea. Shibola haleket, which is a halachic work, Siman Reish Vav, B'Shem Shal Shivas HaGoyim, and Kol Boy B'Shem Reb Hai Goyim. We're going to look at these 2 sources in a moment, and we're going to see why the Rebbe is telling us to look at these sources specifically. Okay, then the Rebbe continues, but the custom has already become prevalent to put pieces around. And a custom amongst Jews becomes Torah. This is a phrase that goes to the Yerushalmi, goes to also to the Bavli, but it goes back to the Gemara, that a custom amongst Jews becomes Torah, and therefore because the custom has become that Jews put pieces of bread around the house, therefore you shall do so. This quote comes from Shulchan Aruch Admor HaZaken, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Seif Siman Tov Lamed Beis, at the end of Siman Tov Lamed Beis. Okay, so the halacha is, the mitzvah is to search, not to find. Custom is to put pieces of bread out. The custom has become so prevalent that now it becomes something that we should be doing. Now, in terms of what the reasons for this minhag is, Re'ei b'chak Yaakov, see the chak Yaakov, which is also halachic work. We're going to look it up in a moment. Time in minhag zeh, the reasons for this minhag. We're going to look at the chak Yaakov and we'll see the reasons for why we're putting the piece of bread out. Now, the yesh l'hoisef tam. Now the Rebbe adds his own. So till now, the Rebbe has been collecting, right? This, as I mentioned, the Rebbe calls the work a collection of reasons and customs. So the Rebbe collected. He collected the reasons he collected the sources for the custom, or I'm saying the sources for the mitzvah, the Shibala Leket and the Kolboy, which say that the mitzvah is to search, not to find. And then he quoted the Alter Rebbe, which says that it's become a custom to put pieces of bread out. And then he tells you, go see the Chak Yaakov for the reasons. And now the Rebbe adds his own reasons. Yesh l'hoisef tam, we might add to the reasons for why we put pieces of bread out, in addition to the Chak Yaakov's reason. So 2 reasons. Number 1, so that during the nullification of the daytime, namely like this, there are twice when you make nullification of the chametz. Nullifying the chametz is making a declaration that any chametz you may own, any chametz you may have is rendered ownerless. Now, nowadays it's a bit different because we sell our chametz, but we still make this declaration. Once we do it at the end of the search on the night before Pesach, and the next time we make this declaration of rendering all chametz we may have ownerless, we make that declaration the next day after we burn the chametz. Now, in the declaration during the day, we add a word, we'll look at the text soon, but we add a word that's not there in the night chametz, in the night declaration. And there we say, kol chamira v'chamira, any chametz or yeast, techamise, that I have seen. There's two words used, one's chazise and one's chamise, and during the day we say chamise. And chamise implies, as we're going to see soon, that I recently saw the chametz. So in order for me to make the declaration tomorrow, in which I say that I'm rendering chametz that I've recently seen ownerless, I have to actually have chametz that I recently saw. And because the custom is to put 10 pieces of bread out, now I have a reason to make the statement that I'm rendering chametz I've recently seen ownerless because I just saw them last night. I collected them. So this is reason number one, says the Rebbe, in addition to the Chak Yaakov's reason. Reason number one for why we put pieces of bread out, so that next day when I make the declaration that I'm rendering all chametz that I've recently seen ownerless, that statement will have meaning because I actually recently saw chametz last night when I collected it. Reason number one. Reason number two is the gam shelo yishkach chayvas biur, lest I forget the obligation of burning. And v'lo yitzarech lisref hakeli shalokach lebdiko k'meshkosav v'soif siman tov memhei. So he's making a reference to a law which is as follows, which we're going to learn again. We'll learn it soon. We'll look at the source for this as well later. So the law is that there's a dispute as to whether or not you actually have to do any actual burning. Now, if I don't find any chametz, right? Let's say I go by the dry letter of the law, not by the custom. So I don't put 10 pieces out. And as we just learned, by the letter of the law, that's fine. So I search my house and I find no chametz. And the next day, what am I burning? There's nothing to burn. So the custom is to burn whatever you're using to search, the spoon or the feather, the candle, which you definitely have to have, whatever you're using to burn, to search, burn that. Why are you burning that? Because if we let you get away without burning chametz, it's going to become a thing in your mind. Oh, you don't have to burn chametz. You just have to search it. When in reality, you have to search chametz, and if you find, you have to burn. So we want the idea of you burning chametz to still be in your habit, and therefore we're going to make you burn the things you use to search for chametz. And therefore, says the Rebbe, this is another reason why you should put 10 pieces out, because now you definitely have something to burn. So it'll become part of the routine that you burn chametz, and we won't forget that part of the mitzvah. And likewise, you're preventing yourself from having to have to burn the utensils you use. We burn the utensils anyway, but in theory, you don't have to, because you have the 10 pieces of bread. So two reasons for this custom. This is the end of the Rebbe's comment. Okay, if anything's not clear, please, now would be a good time to ask, because what I'm about to do is, I'm going to unpack all. The Rebbe quoted a bunch of sources here. He quoted the Shibboleh Leket, he quoted the Kolboy, he quoted out the Shulchan Aruch, he quoted the Chak Yaakov, again quoted the Shulchan Aruch. So we're going to look at these sources and see how the Rebbe is choosing of these sources and the Rebbe adding these reasons gives a whole new depth to this halacha, and not just a collection with nice little reasons. Anybody want to ask
just
something?
just one thing. I just want to make sure I'm clear. When you said we say chazise at night, that doesn't imply that you saw it recently.
That's correct.
It's just a different. Okay.
We're going to see soon. Yes, that's good. It's a good point. We're going to see. Right. Okay. So if you just read the yeah, go on. Sorry.
The last din at the end where it says you won't have to burn the kli.
Yeah.
Means if you wouldn't find the bread, then you would have to burn it.
Yes. Because the halacha is we don't want you to forget the idea of burning. So if you didn't put any pieces of bread out and you didn't find anything, then the next day you have nothing to burn, right? So the halacha tells you burn your spoon just to remember this idea of burning and never to forget this notion of burning. But because you put pieces out, now you're going to burn your pieces. You don't have to burn your spoon, even though we do, but you don't have to burn your spoon or whatever keli you were using. Okay. So we're going to look now. Now we're going to open up. So if all you read was this, you would just see a nice little collection. The Rebbe collected the source for this, for the mitzvah, and then the source for the minhag, and then told us to look in Chak Yaakov. But then when we start to open these sources, we start to find a beautiful depth here, and not just a little collection. This is what I wanted to demonstrate to you. So just, what just happened here? Oh, here we are, page 2. Yeah, just so this, I've been aided a lot by this book right here. The Sefer is the Rebbe's Haggadah, which we're learning, along with commentary from Rabbi Shalom Ber Levin, who's the chief librarian. So he's been very helpful in me preparing these classes. So I figured, okay, so the first source that were quoted was the Shibboleth HaLeket. The Shibboleth HaLeket was the first source quoted. And then he said, Shibboleth HaLeket B'Shem Tshuvas HaGa'onim, which means the Shibboleth HaLeket quoting the responsa of the post-Talmudic age. That's the age of the Ga'onim. And that was the first source to indicate that the search is the mitzvah, but not the finding. That was the earliest source. So let's see. So let's see the Shibboleth HaLeket, which is pretty straightforward. You see my pointer, it's here. I found, says the Shibboleth HaLeket, in the response of the Ga'onim, again, the period of the post-Talmudic era, just after the Talmudic era, when a person makes the blessing for burning the chametz. Now, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but the blessing you make before you search for the chametz is not al bedikas chametz. You know, blessed are you, King of the universe, who has commanded us to search for the chametz. We don't say that. We say, who has commanded us to rid our home of the chametz. Biur chametz. Why we do that, not bedikas chametz, the Rebbe also has a comment on that. We're going to leave that alone. But at any rate, that's the bracha you make before you search. Okay. Now, Einer Choishe says the Shibboleth HaLeket in the name of the Ga'onim. One should not be concerned in Einer Moitza if he doesn't find any chametz. Biur chametzu. Nonetheless, he is still engaged in ridding his home of chametz, even if he doesn't find it anyway. Why? Because he's looking for it to rid himself of it, to rid his house of it. And that's what he's making his bracha on. So the search itself is an active manner in which you're ridding your home of chametz. I'm going around my home to get rid of it. So I don't have to actually find anything. The bracha won't be for a waste if I didn't find anything. The bracha is legit bracha. Because the bracha is the act that I'm doing of searching my home to rid myself of it. And even if I don't find anything, so what? I still did my search. I still went in an active mode of ridding my home of chametz, even if I didn't technically find any. And therefore the bracha is okay. So this is the source, the earlier source that I was quoting, this idea that the mitzvah of searching the chametz is not about finding chametz. And therefore the 10 pieces are just a custom. Now the Rebbe quotes the Kolboy. Now, if you notice before, go back here, and the Rebbe quoted the Kolboy. He said, Kolboy b'shem Rav Hayom. The Kolboy in the name of Rav Hayom, which means you have to go through the Kolboy and find where he quotes Hayom to make the point. So let's do that with the help of Rabbi Shalom Ber Levin. So let's look at the second paragraph here, which comes first, right? It's Kolboy Siman Mem Ches. Kolboy is a halachic work, chapter 88, paragraph 10, and this is paragraph 22. So let's look at paragraph 10 first, because it comes first, which is where he quotes Rav Hayom. Rav Hayom Zal, Rav Hayom of blessed memory says the Kolboy, Birchas habir lefnei b'dika, making the blessing to rid one's home of chametz before one searches, is Yerushas Avos. We have it by custom, we have it by inheritance from our fathers. Shalo yasiach, he shouldn't distract himself ad sheyigmor, until he concludes the search. Ubedin hava sheyasakein, and it's actually by law correct not to get distracted from when you make the blessing to your search. Why? Kedei shelo yaveh behest chadas, so he shouldn't distract himself. Ki keshiyimna atzman asicha liba mechuvan l'maisa. If he doesn't, he actually says you shouldn't. Lo yasiach means you shouldn't talk. I'm sorry, you shouldn't talk from when you make the blessing till after you finish searching, because if you start talking, you're going to distract yourself. And when you stop yourself from talking, his heart is set on getting the job done. His thoughts are, properly aligned. To search. Now what it's okay. So he shouldn't speak. Don't speak so you don't distract yourself. Made the blessing, get straight to your search. Okay. Now if you spoke mundane matters, meaning to say you start to talk about matters that are not related to the search. If you spoke about matters related to the search, then that's not a distraction. That's part of your search. Let's say you said, can you please pass me the candle? That's not a distraction from your search. Your talk is part of your search. So that's not a problem. But what if you're talking about mundane matters, unrelated issues? And you did so bein bracha lebedika. You did so between the bracha and the search. So before you started searching, after the blessing, you started talking about regular, mundane, unrelated issues. Koidim sheyasal, before he starts searching. So he's got to make a bracha again. Because every bracha must be made just as you're about to observe the mitzvah. And because you spoke after the bracha, before you observe the mitzvah of searching, you got to make the bracha again. But if you did begin searching, and then you spoke unrelated mundane matters. Okay, so you have a big home, Baruch Hashem, 10 rooms, and you begin in room 1. So you made the bracha, and you started searching room 1 right away. Now, before you get to room 2, you started chatting about unrelated issues. So do I have to go back and make a bracha again? Well, that's a big question. Because I did start searching, but I didn't finish searching. So says Reb Hai Goyen, quoted by the Kolboy, you don't have to go back and make another bracha. Now why? Why would you make another bracha? This, it seems to be, is the Rebbe's source. Why don't you make the bracha again? Because the mitzvah is not to find, the mitzvah is to search. If the mitzvah was to find chametz, then you wouldn't be able to talk from the moment you made the bracha until you went to the entire house and found all the chametz. But because the mitzvah is not to talk, because the mitzvah is not the burning, but the mitzvah is the searching, the moment you started searching, you've already started the mitzvah. And therefore, there's no reason to make the bracha again. Because you've already did the mitzvah right after your bracha. Because the mitzvah is the search. And you did search. This is what the Rebbe is pointing to, it would seem. Nonetheless, it's still not appropriate to do so in the first case. Because it's best, obviously, to keep not to distract yourself until you're done. But here we can see this idea that the mitzvah is right at the beginning, the first act of searching, not the conclusion. Right? Now, the reason why it's interesting, as Rabbi Levin points out, that the Rebbe tells us to look at kolboy by Rav Hagoin rather than just saying kolboy, is because the kolboy actually makes the same statement a little later in section 22 of the same chapter, where there he writes straight out that the mitzvah is not the finding, but the searching. He says here, it's a custom in many places, shall pass, that you hide pieces of bread in different corners of the home, that the person searching it shall find it, right? He quotes this custom. And he should get rid of those pieces. Because if he doesn't find anything, those people were concerned with bracha levatala. Now we're introduced to a new idea. The Kolboy says that there are some places which have the custom like we have to put pieces of bread around the table, to put pieces of bread around the house. But why do they do that? They do that because they don't want to have a wasted bracha. Because in their view, the bracha is to burn the chametz. If you're not finding any chametz, then what kind of bracha are you making? And therefore they want you to find chametz that you're getting rid of. And that way the bracha will be valid. But says the Kolboy, we're not concerned with that. Because our opinion is, when you make the bracha of getting rid of the chametz, it's not a question of actually physically burning, but lavard im nimtza, to rid yourself of the chametz if you find it. The mitzvah is the search, not the burning, not the finding. And the burning is only to find lest you need to burn. So let's break this down. The Kolboy introduces the minhag of putting pieces of bread around the table. But the way he introduces it is, the reason he gives is, not like the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave other 2 reasons. And the Chot Yaakov, we're going to learn later, also give other reasons. But the Kolboy quotes his custom in some places where they put pieces of bread around the table. Why? Because they want the bracha to be valid. Because the bracha is to burn chametz. And they want the bracha to be valid by finding chametz and burning it. Says the Kolboy, that's a mistake. It's a mistake because the mitzvah is not to burn. The mitzvah is to search. And if you find, you burn. And that's why you make the bracha to burn chametz. Right? So the Rebbe does not quote this part of the Kolboy. He says to look at Kolboy in the name of High going. He tells you to look over here. Right? And over here, there's a few reasons why I could think of this. Number one, as we're going to see soon, the Rebbe actually rejects this statement from the Kolboy, right? Because the Kolboy concludes by saying that's a mistaken custom. And for us, it's not a mistaken custom. We just have other reasons for the custom. But it's not a mistake, the custom, whereas the Kolboy says it's a mistake. So maybe that's reason number one why the Rebbe doesn't quote that part of the Kolboy. Another reason that could be is because this high going is even stronger. Because this high going, which says that after you started the search and you made an interruption by talking about mundane matters, and the Kolboy says you don't have to redo the bracha. Why? Because the moment you start doing the bdika, you've already done the mitzvah. This high going is very strong in saying that the moment, not just the end of the search is when you did the mitzvah, but the beginning of the search is when you did the mitzvah, which really hits the idea home that the mitzvah is not the finding, but it's the searching. And not even the searching, not even the whole searching, just the beginning of the searching. The very act of searching is already the mitzvah. And therefore, the moment you've done the act of searching, no need to redo bracha, even if you interrupted yourself. So these are two possible reasons why the Rebbe tells us to look at this part of Haggadah rather than this piece from the Kolboy. Okay. So again, if it's not clear, please interrupt me. Now, this is a source that we're going to look at that the Rebbe does not quote. The next three sources the Rebbe doesn't quote. And this to me is amazing. And we're going to see, I think, how the Rebbe's added their reasons give a whole new insight here. So the Ramah writes, the Ramah, of course, Moshe Isserlis, who is we have the Code of Jewish Law written by Rabbi of Cairo. Rabbi of Cairo's Code of Jewish Law is mostly follows the Sephardic custom. And Rabbi Moshe Isserlis of Prague wrote glosses on the Code of Jewish Law. And those glosses are the Ashkenazic custom in contrast to Rabbi of Cairo's Sephardic custom. So he writes, the Ramah writes, Simon Tov on my base, as you can see. The Noyagim, it's our custom, la'niach p'titei chametz, to put pieces of chametz b'makom sheyimtzem haboidik, in such a place that the person searching will find it. What's the reason that Ramah gives? Kedei shelo yehei berachos levatola, so that his bracha should not be for naught. So the Ramah takes the reason that the Kolboy rejected. So from the Ramah's perspective, it would seem that it's indeed, he says the word noyagim, it's a custom to put the pieces of bread out. But to him, it seems like the putting the pieces of bread out is not just a random custom, but it's a custom that has halachic reasons. Because if you don't find bread, it might be a wasted bracha. Even though the Kolboy rejected that, right? So which means, from the Ramah's perspective, it would seem that the mitzvah, the bracha of burning the chametz, includes actual burning, not just searching. But he concludes, umiyu, however, im loy nasam, if he did not put pieces of bread out, loy ikev, he didn't undo his mitzvah. It's still okay. The das kal adam, because most people think, im bracha, when they make the blessing, what they have in mind when they make the blessing before they search is levayed im nimtza, to burn if they find. And here he puts in parentheses Kolboy. That's the Kolboy we saw earlier. Right? So let's think what the Ramah is saying. The Ramah is saying that as far as I'm concerned, the truth is you really should find chametz and burn it, because that's what the mitzvah says. That's what the bracha says. The bracha says, I'm now going to burn chametz. Okay, so it's best if you find and burn. So put pieces of bread out. But look, if you didn't, it's okay, because you can rely on the Kolboy, which says that when you made the bracha to burn the chametz, you didn't mean you're actually going to burn. You meant you're going to burn if you find. And therefore, if you don't put pieces of bread out, it's okay. But I actually think you should put pieces of bread out, so that way the bracha is fully legit. Now, obviously, we can see from the way that Rebbe quoted this, the way that Rebbe put it laid out earlier, that Rebbe is not with the Ramah here. Right? Because the Rebbe says that it's a minig. And from a din, you don't need to at all. And that's indeed what the Alter Rebbe says in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's look at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Let's look at the Taz first. Let's look at the Taz. Taz is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he comments on the Ramah's statement. Right? The Ramah said, as we just said, that in the first instance, you should put pieces of bread out. And that way the bracha is going to be fully legit. And if you didn't, it's okay, because you could rely on the Kolboy's version of the bracha, that what you meant when you said you're going to burn the chametz, you meant that if you find, you'll burn. But you really should put pieces out, because then you'll actually find and burn. Says the Taz, I actually disagree, says the Taz. Taz says you actually should not put pieces out. Don't. What the Ramah says, that if you did it, it's okay, meaning if you didn't put pieces out, it's okay. The Ramah says, the Taz says, this is what you should do. You should not put pieces out. Why shouldn't you put pieces out? Very simple reason. The Chashinon were concerned, says the Taz, lest the person accidentally leave it in a place where the person searching will not find it. And then you have a problem. You're left with chametz in your house on Pesach. So don't put the pieces out. You're setting yourself up for a disaster. What if you don't find the pieces? Now you're stuck. So says the Taz, don't put them out. So now we have kind of three directions to go. You have the way the Rebbe is presenting it, as we'll see in a moment from the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that the custom is to put it out, but it's merely a custom, because the halacha, the mitzvah is to search. You have the Ramah, which says it's not just a custom to put it out. Putting out the pieces of bread and finding it actually makes your bracha better, because when you make the bracha to burn the chametz, it's much better if you actually found chametz to burn. And then you have the third way, the Taz, which says, no, don't put pieces of bread out because you're going to be left with pieces of bread in your house on chametz. So those are the three ways. Okay, if it's not clear, please interrupt me. Okay, I'm not going to go through the Alter B'Shulchan Aruch, but you can see it here. I'll just read over here. Umikra Adin, he mentions here at the beginning that those who have the custom. He doesn't say there is a custom. He says those who have a custom to put pieces of bread out, make sure you put out hard pieces so that they don't crumble, and put it in a place that won't get dragged away by the kids. Make sure it's a place you'll find it. And then he concludes, Umikra Adin, and from the strict letter of the law, you don't have to put pieces of bread out at all. Halalu, these pieces, before you search. Because even if the person searches, and he won't find any chametz, but in his search, nonetheless, he did not make a wasted bracha. Because this is the mitzvah. Live the chametz, to search for the chametz, and to seek it out. Maybe you'll find something there. And if you didn't find any chametz, no problem. You made did the mitzvah as it's supposed to be done. And then he says, which we saw that the Rebbe quoted that in the Haggadah, the customs already come to put the pieces out. Minog Yisrael Torah, the minog of the Jew becomes Torah, so you should do it. Okay, so that's the third way, the Rebbe's way, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, which is that it's by law no reason to put the bread out. It does not help your bracha, like the Ramah said that it helps your bracha. The Ramah says that putting the pieces out help your bracha, because then you're actually burning chametz, and the bracha is to burn chametz. But the Alter Rebbe is saying, no, it's just a minhag, and the bracha is perfectly fine, even if you don't put any pieces out, and even if you don't find anything. Now, in terms of explaining the reason for this custom, the Rebbe told us to look at the Chok Yaakov. So here we have the Chok Yaakov. Chok Yaakov, as I mentioned, the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he writes like this. He says, if you didn't, but he quotes the Ramah, which says that, first of all, the Ramah said you should pick pieces out, because in the Ramah's view, putting pieces of chametz out helps your bracha, because by finding it, now you're legitimately burning. But then the Ramah concluded, but if you didn't, it's okay, because you can rely on the Kol Boy's version of the bracha, that you were thinking that if I find, I will burn. So says the Chok Yaakov. He quotes the Ravid and the Taz, which say that you should not put out the chametz, like we learned before. Now he gives the reasons. Hatam, here. Hatam shemanichem. The reason why you do put it out. This is remember, the Rebbe told us to look in the Chok Yaakov to find the reasons for this custom, right? And the reason for the custom, as we just finished learning, is not because of the bracha. In the Alter Rebbe's view and the Rebbe's view in the Haggadah, it's not for the bracha. The Ramah said it's for the bracha, but not in our view. Not in Alter Rebbe's view and the Rebbe's view. It's not for the bracha. So what is the reason? Says the Chok Yaakov. Hatam shemanichin, the reason why we put pieces of bread out is shelo yishkach levatel lemacher. So you shouldn't forget to make the declaration. I mentioned before that there are two declarations you make to render all chametz you own in ownerless. You make the first declaration after you finish searching that before, and then you make the next declaration the next day. Now, having pieces of bread will remind you to make the declaration the next day. He's quoting from somebody, from Mahrash, that if he has chametz, then when he's burning the chametz, it will remind him to make the declaration again. That's reason number one. The linira, this is the Chok Yaakov quoting from Mahrash. The linira, to me it seems, says the Chok Yaakov. Reason number two, Tam Haminag, the reason for this custom is Shem Yivdoik, as if he searches, V'lo Yimtza, he doesn't find any chametz, Zman Ma, after some time, Yisra Shel Shov, he'll get lazy, Yisyayish Min Abdik, and he'll give up on searching. V'lo Yivdoik Oid Heitev, and he won't search anymore, because it's like, there's no chametz here, I'm not searching so much. Therefore, you put pieces of bread out, and therefore the person searching knows that he has to definitively find something. And if the people putting it out do it in such a way that that he doesn't know where they are, then he's going to really be searching. Because he's finding these pieces, it keeps his, he'll place his intention, to search very well. Maybe he'll find even more. And he concludes, one should not stop a custom of Jewish people. Okay, so let's now let's go back to the Rebbe's piece of the Haggadah. And let's see. The Rebbe starts off, first of all, by quoting two sources, early sources, which say that there's no mitzvah involved with putting pieces of bread out at all. It doesn't help your bracha. He quotes the Shibboleth Leket and quotes the Kolboy from Rabbi going that does not help your bracha in any way, shape, or form to put pieces of bread out. Because the mitzvah is the searching, not the finding and destroying. And this is unlike the Ramah. Unlike the Ramah, and like the customs mentioned by the Kolboy, which the Kolboy rejected, where they think it is good for the bracha. Number one. Then the Rebbe quoted the Rebbe, which says that the custom is to search. That's number two the Rebbe quoted. Just by the way, in parentheses, just stam, it's something I thought of today, that when the Rebbe quotes the idea of a custom, he quotes the Rebbe. But when he quotes the idea that it's a mitzvah to search, not to find, he quotes Shibboleth Leket and Kolboy, which are earlier sources. Why not, the Rebbe also made this statement. This idea that the mitzvah is to search and not to find, the Rebbe also said. He could have quoted this whole thing from the Rebbe. Or he could have quoted the whole thing from the Chok Yaakov, let's say, because the Chok Yaakov also said it's a minhag, right? So maybe when the Rebbe is trying to get to a source for a mitzvah, the Rebbe goes to the earliest source as possible. Go to the earliest sources. How far back does this go? This idea, a clear statement which says that the mitzvah is to search, not to find. Okay, the earlier sources are Shibboleth Leket and Kolboy. But when you want to talk about a custom, then you want to talk about present. You want to go more recent, more contemporary. Because the more contemporary you go, the more you'll prove that it's an actual custom. Especially if we're Lubavitchers and you quote out the Shulchan Aruch, it definitely tells you it's a custom. So maybe that's why he quotes from the different angles. Anyway. Okay, so the third thing that the Rebbe says is to see the Chok Yaakov, which give reasons for this custom. What are the two reasons that the Chok Yaakov gave? Reason number one is because having the pieces of bread will remind you to make the declaration tomorrow. Because you have to make two declarations of nullification, one after your search and one by burning the chametz. And by having pieces to burn, it'll remind you to make the declaration. Okay. Reason number one of the Chok Yaakov. Reason number two of the Chok Yaakov was that by putting pieces out, it'll help you search better. If there's no pieces out there, you kind of walk around the house thinking like, what am I doing here? There's no chametz anyway. But when there's pieces there, you're actually going to start searching because you know you have things to find, and then maybe you'll actually find more. Now the Rebbe adds two reasons. So the first reason is that the Rebbe adds, that when he makes the declaration of nullification during the day, he should be able to say this word, dechamise, which we said that means I recently saw. Okay, so now let's delve into this reason. Let's go down to page 3, if you're looking at the PDF. So first, let's look at the Rebbe's comment on these words, chazise, that I've seen. Before we do that, let's look at the translation. Let's look at the actual declaration. So if you're looking at the English, it's on page 4 on your PDF over here, I'm looking at the Hebrew here. So the night before, well, let's look at the English because it's the English. No, it's not coming out. There we are. Okay, so after the search, one must also nullify the chametz he may have overlooked and say, all leaven or anything leavened, which is in my possession, which I have neither seen nor removed, and about which I am unaware, shall be considered not and ownerless as the dust of the earth. Okay, so the night before, after you finish searching, what are you declaring ownerless? Anything you haven't seen, because you just did a search. And whatever you're found, you're burning tomorrow. So you're not rendering that ownerless, right? The 10 pieces you found, or any other chametz you may have found during your search, that's not the stuff you're rendering ownerless, because you're burning that tomorrow. What you're rendering ownerless are the things you haven't seen, or things you haven't removed, about which I'm unaware. Okay, now the next day, when I am burning the chametz, now I'm rendering everything ownerless. Everything. Not just the stuff that I don't know about, but even the stuff that I do know about. Right? The stuff that I found last night, I'm now making ownerless when I burn the chametz. And this is what we say. All leaven, or anything leavened, which is in my possession, whether I've seen it or not, whether I have observed it or not. Two different descriptions to describe things you saw. I've seen it or not, or whether I've observed it or not. Whether I've removed it or not, should be considered not ownerless and dust of the earth. So two expressions. Whether I've seen it or not, whether I've observed it or not. In the Hebrew, going back to page 3, those are the words here. The chazise, the lo chazise, that I've seen and that I have not seen. The chamise, the lo chamise, that I've observed or not observed. So what's this double expression? It's the same thing. So said the Rebbe, no, it's not the same thing. Comments the Rebbe, the chazise or the chamise. He quotes the Bach, the Bais Chodosh, which says, Ef Shalom might say, chamise, that which I have seen, or seen, is b'shas abdika, when I searched. Things that I saw when I searched. And chazise means things that I've observed, ma'olam, ever. So whether I saw it a month ago, or whether I saw it last night, I'm rendering it ownerless. That's the way the Rebbe is translating, based in the Bach, these two words. When I make the declaration by the burning of the chametz, rendering all my stuff ownerless, and in that declaration, I am declaring even things I know about to be ownerless. What do I say? I say things that I have observed or I think that I've seen, which the difference there would be, in the Hebrew at least, is that which I have seen last night when I searched for chametz, and that which I have observed ever. So now says the Rebbe, if you don't put pieces of chametz out and you don't find anything, then what does this word mean? This word, which means you're rendering chametz that you found last night to be ownerless, you didn't find anything last night. You didn't put anything out to find. So to be certain that you actually have something you saw last night, which you are now going to render ownerless, you should put pieces of bread out. It's beautiful. Reason number 1 the Rebbe gave. Reason number 2, going back to the Rebbe's comment on page 1. That was reason number 1. Reason number 2 is the Gam Shalish Kachlevis beer. Also, she should not forget the obligation of burning. Right? If you don't have anything to burn, you may forget about it. And if you don't have anything to burn, you're going to be required to burn the utensils you use to search. As the Alter Rebbe writes, at the end of chapter 445 of Shulchan Aruch. So let's go look at that chapter and see what we get. I'm just going too far. Wait, I can quote it here. Oh, here. On page 4, if you're looking at the PDF, looking at the papers. Now, there's machlokes, big machlokes, that Alter Rebbe is referring to, which is what exactly is the nature of destroying chametz? Is the nature of destroying chametz by any means? Or is the nature of destroying chametz by actually physically burning? So in the previous section, he quoted the other opinion, which says that you can destroy it by any means. And then he says, Yesh chalkan of those who disagree, I'll call them all the above, and they say, that the chametz has to actually, meaning the previous opinions say that destroying chametz could be done by rendering it ownerless. And that's enough to destroy chametz. You're just ridding yourself of chametz by making it ownerless. But there are those that disagree and say you have to actually physically get rid of it. And ein biyude el b'sreifa. And the only proper way to truly rid yourself of chametz is by actually physically burning it. Where do we know this? We learn from the mitzvah of noisar. Noisar is not every offering in the temple has a time limit as to when you have to eat it. A day and a half, 2 days, whatever the law is. And anything left over, any meat that was offered on the altar that is left over past the expiry date by when it has to be eaten, then it has to be burnt. So it says like this, Man noiser yeshna bal taisiru, just like noiser, this leftover meat from the carbon. You're required, the prohibition is you're not allowed to leave any behind. Vital and sreifa, and if you did leave behind, you got to burn it. So af chametz, so too with chametz. Sheyeshna bal taiser, which you're not allowed to own, as he says in the parentheses, tal and sreifa has to be burnt. Okay, so dispute. Can you get rid of it by any means, or do you have to get rid of it by burning specifically? Says the Alter Rebbe, the halacha follows the first opinion, which is that there's any means can be used to rid yourself of the chametz. Even just rendering it ownless is good enough. You don't have to actually physically burn it. Shari Nemar, because the pasuk says, you have to burn the leftover carbon and a fire. The darshu chachamim, and our sages learn, specifically, this noiser leftover carbon has to be burnt. But not everything that the Torah says you're not allowed to enjoy, you have to burn. Specifically, noiser has to be burnt. But ba'afal pikein, nonetheless, the custom in our communities is like the latter opinion to actually burn it. Okay, so the halacha is you don't have to burn, but the custom is to burn. Now, therefore, it's our custom. The chametz which you find at the night of the 14th, let's just say even without putting pieces out. Let's see, right? Because you're going by the letter of the law. You're not following custom. You didn't put any pieces, but you happen to have find. So what does the letter of the law say? I searched to burn. So what do? I could burn it as soon as I'm done searching. Why not? But says the Alter Rebbe, no, don't do that. Even though in theory you could do that, as soon as you're done searching, burn it, but don't do that. Don't burn it right away at night. And you put it away, to burn it tomorrow. The Yom Din a day. Why? To compare it to the law of Neisar. The law of Neisar, this law, which is where the opinion which said you have to burn chametz, derived it from the Neisar, because Neisar is leftover carbon that has to be burnt. And the mitzvah, the mitzvah of burning Neisar is l'soifer b'yom, to burn it by day. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, anything which is left over, the Neisar, from the carbon, on the third day specifically, but should be burnt, but not by night. And therefore, in order to fulfill this other opinion, which says to burn the chametz specifically, and this burning of the chametz is compared to Neisar, so burn your chametz the same way you would do it by Neisar. In the same way Neisar, the leftover carbon, is burnt by day, so too, burn your chametz by day. But if you decided and you wanted to burn the chametz right after you searched, so that children don't play with it, or a rat or a mouse don't move it around, if you want, you could burn it right away if you're worried your kids are going to open the bag and sprawl the chametz all over the house. Now comes the main point. What if you didn't find any chametz the night before? And you want to uphold the minhag of burning? It's good to burn the utensil you use to search. Why? That you don't forget the obligation to burn. L'shana haba next year, because last year I didn't burn. What do I have to burn this year for? And I don't want that to happen. And likewise, so you don't forget to make the second declaration. So here's the interesting thing. So now the Rebbe tells us 2 reasons to burn the utensils if you didn't find any chametz. Reason number 1 is that next year you shouldn't forget about this idea of burning, because last year I didn't burn, no, I'm not going to burn this year. It's going to go out of your routine. Okay, so so if you don't find anything, at least burn the utensil. So that way it's part of your routine to burn. Reason number 1. Reason number 2, the Alter Rebbe says to burn the next day is so that you remember to make the second declaration of nullification, the second bittul, by burning. This second reason is exactly like the Chok Yaakov. right? The Chak Yaakov said that the reason why you should put 10 pieces of bread out is to remind, one of the reasons he said was to remind you that the next day you should make your declaration of nullification. You should make the bittul. So this second thing follows the Chak Yaakov. But the Rebbe quotes, adds, going back to the beginning here, the Rebbe tells us to look at the second point. It doesn't mention the idea of you're going to forget to make the second declaration, because that's already here in the Chak Yaakov. He only tells you the other point, which is not to forget next year's burning. If you don't have pieces to burn, you'll have to end up burning your spoon. And to avoid that, you should put 10 pieces out. So this is one passage from the Rebbe, which when you read it on the surface, it seems like just a simple passage. But then when you start to dig deep and you start to open up all the sources, you find a whole world of what the Rebbe is trying to make in these things. Now, I might suggest the following. This ends direct commentary on the Rebbe's, reading and translating the Rebbe's note here. And before I go further, if you have any questions, now would be the time to, any clarification. No, we're clear? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
According to the Chak Yaakov, then but the second reason that a person shouldn't get lazy into what am I searching for,
yeah,
then a person would need to put those 10 pieces around this whole area he's searching, and it should be hidden from him. So he's actually not going to get lazy and say, just kind of get over with.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. Meaning that reason doesn't work for a guy who's living alone. Essentially what you're saying. Guy's living alone, he's putting pieces out, he can still get lazy, just go around, pick up the pieces and leave, like some do, unfortunately, right? Is that your point you're making? I think. So let's think.
Yeah, that has to be like that reason only applies when you do it for real, not don't just go through the emotions.
Exactly. Yeah. But I want to say I do want to say the following, and this is something interesting that I thought of as I was preparing this class, and maybe I'm totally wrong. Tell me what you think. So the Ramah said that the reason why you put 10 pieces out is that the bracha that you say, be your chametz, to burn the chametz, should be a substantial bracha. Right? Even though he said that if you don't, it's okay. But in the first instance, you should put pieces out to make the bracha a real bracha, because the bracha is to destroy the chametz. And if you find, then you can destroy. But as we just learned, that the Taz rejected that, the Kolboy rejected that, the Alter Rebbe rejected that, and said that the bracha is perfectly fine because the mitzvah is not the burning but the searching. After you look at these reasons that the Rebbe gives, specifically the ones the Rebbe gives, well, actually both of them, what happens? In both of these reasons, the Rebbe actually is validating the biur. He's validating the biur because the first reason was that the chamise should be that the word chamise should be correct. When you say that I am rendering all things that I found last night ownerless, that's only virtue. That's only of any value if you actually have something that you found last night. And then the other reason that the Rebbe gave was that you shouldn't forget the mitzvah of burning. Right? This second reason not to forget the mitzvah of burning is according to the opinion that said that you actually have to burn it. The first thing here, which says that which says that the putting out the bread and then finding it substantiates the statement of declaring your bittul, declaring the nullification. That's according to the opinion which says you don't have to burn. The declaration is enough. But so either way, the mitzvah of biur is being helped by finding pieces of chametz. Even though the bracha is okay without finding anything, right? The bracha is perfectly 100% good. And the bracha is on the search. But nonetheless, having found pieces of chametz, it almost goes back to like the Ramah, but not mamash like the Ramah. Not that the bracha is compromised if you don't find pieces of bread. But that having pieces of bread actually substantiates the biur better, because it makes you not forget it next year, and it makes the declaration more accurate. So it's almost as if the Rebbe is taking the minhag and making it more than just a nice custom, giving it halachic depth, but without in any way going as far as the Ramah and saying that the bracha is compromised if you don't have bread. That's what it seems to me that the Rebbe is doing with these reasons, more than even the Chak Yaakov. which talks about the search beat, right? The Chak Yaakov's reason himself, right? He quoted first the Mahdi, which said, right? Where did it say? Where's the Chak Yaakov? Up here on top. First, he quoted the Mahdi, which said the reason is that you shouldn't forget to make the bittul tomorrow. Okay, that would be in line with what the Rebbe is saying. But the reason for that would be in line with this idea that the finding the chametz actually helps the bittul, because it reminds you to make the bittul tomorrow. But the second reason that you shouldn't get lazy on your search, that is unrelated to the biur, it's related to the search directly. Whereas the other reasons actually substantiate the biur itself, as if to say that finding it, even though it's not necessary for the bracha, it still adds to the bracha which said biur chametz. I'm not sure if I'm being 100% clear, and I'm not sure I'm clear in my own mind on this, but I think that's where the Rebbe is going with this. Anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed preparing this. I hope you get an appreciation for, first of all, the Rebbe's precision in every word being detailed, and an appreciation for the depth and the nuance of the Rebbe's. It's beautiful. Anyway, thank you all for listening. God willing, next week we have more pieces. I thought we'd get to tonight, but I guess not. But next week, the piece we're going to do is going to go historical, midrashic. The Rebbe's even going to get into the rhyme, Kaddish, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, getting into the details of different versions of how you write that and which one rhymes better. We're even going to get to that. All kinds of interesting things, God willing, coming next week and the week after. Shkoyach for joining. Good night.
Kyle, thanks a lot.